So what's going on, guys? DIY Dan here, and this is another episode of Day to Day Around the House. In this video, I'm going to be replacing the heating element in my electric dryer. I am also going to go over how I diagnosed this issue, where I got the part from, how much it cost, and how easy it is to replace. Now, I did this on my Maytag Bravos dryer, but they all diagnose pretty much the same, so even if you don't have this dryer, it might still help you out. So let's get to it. So right here I've got it turned on, and it is on high heat and heavy duty. The drum was spinning and everything seemed to be working okay, except for the fact that I had no heat in the dryer. I went ahead and pulled the hose off the back of the dryer and verified that the fan was turning as well. So right here I've just got a mask, and you can kind of see that it's blowing the mask, so obviously the fan was turning and exhausting the air. It just was not hot. So I went ahead and unplugged the dryer and took the back cover off. Now, all appliances, refrigerators, dryers, washers, should all have a service manual, and usually they are either taped to the back of the dryer or they are located inside. So I took the lid off of this one. I actually took some extra screws off that I didn't have to. So I thought I was going to have to pull the back panel off of the dryer, and that's why I took those extra screws out. You only have to take off the top 3, and then there are 2 metal clips that I used a flathead screwdriver to help compress to get that lid to pop off, and was able to find the service technician's manual, and this can tell you how to get into the diagnostic codes and give you service routines to help repair your dryer. Once getting the service manual out, I went ahead and set that top cover back into place and plugged the dryer back in. So using the service manual, I found out how to pull up the service mode, where you can pull codes and engage certain aspects of the dryer so you can see if they're working correctly. Now, this may vary in how this is done depending on the brand of dryer, but it will tell you in that service manual. So on this dryer, in order to pull up diagnostic codes or go into the service routines, you have to press the 3 buttons in sequence, one at a time, 3 times in a row. So I went ahead and did that, and all the lights popped up like they should. Once all the lights popped up, you have to press the first button once, and then actually press the start button, and that engages the motor and the heater. Now, on this model dryer, the heating element and everything is located underneath the dryer. So you have to pull the kick panel off using a flathead screwdriver. There was 2 metal tabs that you just had to bend down a little bit and leverage them out. So once doing that, I was able to access everything I needed to fix this dryer. So once I got that cover off with the test mode on, I could see that the heater was not heating up. So then I went ahead and unplugged the dryer and started diagnosing. So after pulling that cover off, we discovered a little bit of a fire hazard in our dryer. This is 8 years worth of lint that has collected in the bottom of this thing, which needs to be definitely cleaned out and needs to put on an annual once-a-year cleaning, because this could be a definite fire hazard. So the fact that all that lint was in that dryer kind of scared me a little bit, and I was trying to figure out how this system works. So you have vents on the back of the dryer. The air is sucked in through there. So basically the whole bottom of this dryer is filled with fresh air, and then it is sucked through the heater up into the drum going into the dryer, and then it is sucked through the lint screen, pushed past the blower fan, and out the exhaust. And on the back of the dryer, that is where your vent hose is hooked up going into the wall. So basically all the lint and material that was in the bottom of this dryer had been sucked up through the vents in the back of the dryer. Now granted, we've never taken this dryer apart, and it's 8 years old, so that's 8 years worth of lint and crap that have collected on the floor behind the dryer. So I was able to diagnose the heater with it being inside the dryer still, but I'm going to go ahead and pull it out because it's going to be easier for me to show you guys what was the problem with it out on the table instead of in the dryer. So there was 1 1/4-inch screw that was holding this heater element in place. I removed that screw, and then you just had to leverage the heater assembly out. There was a tab on the top of the heater where it went into the ducting, and you just kind of had to lift up and pull the bottom out first. Once getting it out a little bit, I went ahead and disconnected the 2 wires from the actual harness of the dryer. So I went ahead and pulled those off. They're just spade connectors. They can be a little tough, so you might want to use a pair of needle nose to assist getting those off. So I went ahead and pulled the heater out, and granted, I've already diagnosed the problem, but I'm going to show you guys how to check all these things once everything's apart, because it's just going to be easier to do. Obviously, if you were trying to fix this yourself, you would want to check all this stuff before taking it apart to verify your actual problem. So there was one more 1/4 inch screw that I had to pull out to remove the heating element from the housing. You might want to grab some gloves or a pair of pliers to assist in pulling it out. It was a tight fit. So right there you can see the broken wire. So you will need a cheap voltmeter to test the components. I got mine at Harbor Freight for less than $10. And you will want to go to continuity or an ohm test on your meter, basically telling you whether you have an open or closed circuit. On this meter, a 1 on the far left is an open circuit, and a closed circuit you should be pretty much down to 0 as far as what it gives you as a reading. There is a setting to give you a beep telling you it is a closed circuit as well. So on this housing, you're going to have a thermal cutoff switch and a high limit thermostat. Both of these should give you a closed circuit, meaning a 0, like this one is doing here. Now we're going to go ahead and check the high limit thermostat, and it should read the same thing. Now it is a good idea to disconnect at least one wire off of each switch. The red wire was disconnected on the other end already, so that's why I was able to check it. So you don't get a back feed from the other side, possibly giving you a false reading. So basically how this works is the red wire going into the thermal cutout switch, and then the electricity flows through that switch over to the high limit thermostat, through that switch, through the red wire over to the heater element, and then through the heater element back to the other red wire going back to complete the circuit. So if any of those switches are reading open instead of a closed circuit, the heater element will not work because it's going to not allow the electricity to flow through the switch. So both of my switches tested good. So now I'm going to go ahead and show you that the heater is bad with a test, even though we know it already is. So we're going to test the 2 spade connectors going to the heater, and once again we should get a closed circuit. And as you can see on the meter, we have a 1 all the way to the left, meaning it is an open circuit, and that's obviously because that coil wire is broke where I showed you. Just to go one further, I'm going to test the wire at a different location to show you that it will give us a closed circuit in a spot that is not broken on this coil. So here's testing a spot that is good still on this coil, and then I'm going to switch it over across the spot that has the broken lead, and you can see the difference between the readings you get. And then just out of curiosity, I went ahead and tested the new one after it was in the machine, and I was getting 10 ohms, which is what the service manual said I should have across those 2 legs on the coil. So you'll see that meter is reading a 10 ohms right now. So there was a part number on the old heating element that I was able to cross on Amazon, and was able to find the whole kit with some of the thermistor switches for under $35. The heater itself was on Amazon for less than $20 by itself, but I figured this system was 8 years old. And after doing some research, it sounds like it's more likely to be one of those switches than it is the heating element, so I decided to go ahead and get the whole kit. So that kit did come with 2 switches that I didn't end up using. It must have been for an alternate design. I just matched up the switches, and they did have part numbers on them to make sure they were the same. It was just 2 screws that held each switch in place. Again, these spade connectors can be kind of tough, so make sure when you put them back on that they have a nice snug fit. If not, just take a pair of pliers and squeeze the spade connector on the wire a little bit so that you do have a nice snug fit when you push it back into place. If it's not a snug fit on the terminal, it could fall off, or worse yet, anytime electrical has a loose connection, it creates resistance, which creates heat, which could lead to bad things. I always use my drill to put these screws in and out instead of my impact, because I can set the torque settings so I don't strip out the screws when I'm putting them back in. So after replacing both of those switches, it was time to go ahead and put the heating element back into the housing. Once again, this can all be done with this housing in the dryer. I just took this out to make it easier to do the video for you guys to see. Now I did put the new heating element and the old one next to each other real quick to make sure they were the exact same part before trying to put it into place. So the heating element just slides into the housing. I did put some gloves on and had my wife hold the back of the housing to make it easier to get it put into place because it is a very tight fit and there is a lot of sharp edges on that heater element. Then using a pair of pliers, I finished pushing it into place. Went ahead and put that screw back into place that holds it and put the one spade connector terminal back on. Make sure that you take a look down inside and make sure none of the holders of that coil wire came off, because if any of those coils touch the outer wall, it will burn out the coil again. Now I could have taken this cover off, but I ended up just bending it down out of the way, so I'm just bending it back into place right now. The kit also came with a thermal fuse, and I went ahead and replaced it just because I was in there. Same kind of concept as the thermal switches. I used a 1/4-inch wrench to remove the screw. So once getting that screw out, the thermal fuse will come up and pull out. There is a little clip that slides into the sheet metal to hold it in place on the one side, and then the screw holds in the other side. So even though I don't think it matters which position the wires are in, it's just a good habit I get into to take off one wire at a time and put it on the new part so I don't get the wires backwards. And then I did have to use a pair of needle nose to squeeze down that spade connector on this because it wasn't a tight enough fit. Then I went ahead and put it back into place and tightened it down. So right here, I'm just checking the fuse, even though I replaced it, to show you guys how to do it. And basically, we're looking for the same thing. We're looking for a closed circuit, and it was good. So then using the vacuum cleaner, I went ahead and vacuumed out the entire bottom of the dryer to try and get some of that lint out of there. After getting it all cleaned out, I went ahead and put the housing back into place. Remember that the housing does have this little tab on top, so you have to slide the top in first at an angle and then straighten it out, and it should go right down into place. There is also a tab on the bottom bracket that has to line up to tell you that you are installed properly. Once that tab is in place and the screw hole lines up, all that's left to do is tighten it down. Be careful when tightening these screws down. They are just going into sheet metal and they will strip out easily. Then I tugged on it a little bit to make sure it was secure and then hooked the wires back up. It's always a good idea to take pictures of the wiring locations before you take stuff off so you can make sure you put it back on correctly. Once I had everything hooked up, I went ahead and plugged the dryer back in. So now we're going to go back into the test cycle. So I pressed those 3 buttons in sequence, one at a time, 3 times in a row, and started the fan and the heater element. Right there you can see that the heater is glowing nice and hot, and so I knew I was good to go. I just pressed the power button a couple times and it took me out of the test mode. Then I went ahead and reinstalled the kick panel, or whatever you want to call it. There is 2 slots that you need to make sure line up with some metal tabs that are on the bottom. Once you get those lined up, the top part of the panel will just push into place. And that's all there is to it, guys. So just out of curiosity, guys, I went ahead and took the vent hose off and made sure the fan was blowing good and that it was coming out nice and warm, which it was. One other quick side note, guys, is make sure you don't push your dryer too far against the back wall and kink that vent hose. That can cause some issues as well. Now, obviously, this isn't the only possibility for your heater element not working on your dryer, but it is going to be probably the most common possibilities. As with anything these days, you do have circuit boards in there that control everything, and those could be going out as well. Now, since my dryer was over 8 years old, I was debating on just going and getting a new one. However, I'm glad I took the 30 minutes or so that it took me to diagnose the problem, and I was able to fix it for less than $50. So hopefully it lasts me a long time again. Hope you guys enjoyed this video and it gave you some good information. If so, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. The whole concept of my channel is to save you guys money by doing it yourselves without wasting your time. My channel has a wide variety of DIYs, from everything from saltwater aquariums to off-roading, mechanical, electrical, storage ideas, furniture builds, etc. Hope to see you next time. Have a good one. Later.